and the social movement around sports and culture. So what are you hearing from the guys as far as Michael Jordan being that person to stand in the gap?
Well, he's the chair of the Labor Relations Committee, so that's just part of his title and the role that he's accepted. And also he has relationships with Chris Paul, Russell Westbrook, all these other guys, you know, that basically because of Jordan brand. And also Michael Jordan still thinks of himself more as a player than he does as an owner. I think we've seen that over the past few months, the way his competitive juices are. And he knows the health of the future of this league is critical to how this is going to work over the next couple of months, or the next month.
Vinny, it's great to have you this morning. Thanks for getting up. Always great insight.
Great job,
Appreciate
Vinny.
your time today.
Room Raider gives you 0
We
out
gotta
of 10.
take a break.
Put something on those walls, bro. Come on.
On the other side, do the Blazers have any chance whatsoever against the Lakers with no Dame? First things back here, first things first, and we now welcome in Yahoo senior NBA writer Vincent Goodwill. Vinny, thanks for getting up, hanging out with us this morning. Such an historic time in the NBA. If you would, take us inside the last 48 hours in Orlando. I know you're not down there now, but I know you're really locked in and dialed in. How did the players ultimately decide to continue to resume the playoffs this season?
Jenna, I think you initially have to go back to the situation that led to the Milwaukee Bucks deciding to boycott. That was them going rogue. Everything that had been done largely to this point had been players being unified and being on one accord and everybody being in group texts or sort of unified conversations. And George Hill and everybody else in that Bucks locker room decided, hey, we're just not going to play today. You know, you saw the scene of them being in the locker room or not being in the locker room, but you saw the scene of Orlando being on the floor warming up. They had no clue of what was going on. Like, so when everything happened, I wound up getting texts from people with the Lakers saying, well, what are we supposed to do now? Because they've made this decision unilaterally. So when you take that emotion and you carry the emotion into the meeting that happened that night, where the Lakers and Clippers were very vocal, Pat Beverly was really, really vocal, really emotional. Some people weren't even sure as far as where it was coming from and some of the rhetoric that he said towards Executive Director Michelle Roberts. And you know, sort of the Lakers and Clippers walking out of the room, and it's sort of being like the season's in jeopardy here because LeBron James is such a critical part to this. He was really vocal in it. He was more so saying, hey, look, what's the plan here? And because there didn't seem to be a plan from the Bucks who initiated everything, there was the frustration was, hey, you've now put everybody in this bad position. We understand your emotion. We understand everything that happened in Kenosha, Wisconsin, and how you felt compelled to boycott this game, but now this is reflective on everybody. So once the emotions of that night settled down, you come back the next day, you have the meeting with the owners. Michael Jordan was very involved with a handful of the players as far as being a conduit. And once the emotions start to settle down, once the players start to hear more immediate action from the owners, because a lot of the things that we've heard has been over the next 10 years, we're donating this amount of money over the next 10 years, but these guys are still seeing dead bodies in the streets on videos, or, you know, in the case of Kenosha, someone getting shot 7 times. So, and from behind. So I think they were looking for more immediate reaction, more immediate, whether it's legislature, influence, whatever. And once the owners gave their word that, hey, we're going to do more in the immediate right now, that's what led to the players being a lot more open towards coming back. I don't know if there was ever necessarily any intention to directly leave, but I do think there was some confusion and there was the openness to say, hey, you know what? This isn't working right now.
Vinny, when LeBron and Kawhi and their teams, most people would say the 2 best teams in basketball, you know, say we're not playing and leave, if there's such thing as normal circumstances, I would expect that to send massive shockwaves throughout the entire league. In that evening and into the next day, the sense I got from talking to people, and I'm curious if you got the same one, wasn't that guys thought they were bluffing, but they also didn't think the season was over. And if those guys leave, if the Clippers and Lakers are out, the season's over. The NBA's not going to keep going without them. So was your sense that even though that was a drastic measure by maybe the 2 most prominent teams in the league and maybe the 2 most prominent players in the league, that guys in the room thought give them a few hours? Like that they weren't surprised that by the next morning they had softened their stance?
Absolutely. And the one feeling that I had gotten initially was that, hey, LeBron is really upset here, because you got to think, Nick, and we talk about it and we joke about it a lot. LeBron is the statesman of the NBA. Everything that happens through this period is going to be largely reflective upon him. You can argue that he's the face of sports.
Something was done without him. Yep.
And something was done. Not only was something done without him, but if we know one thing about LeBron, LeBron thrives on order and in being calculated. Everything that he's done, whether it's being more than a vote and all these other initiatives that he's done, has been, largely well thought out, well planned. It hasn't been impulsive. So when he saw something that's deemed an impulsive act, whether it's out of emotion, grief, whatever the case may be, I think he understood the emotion and the grief, but he said, okay, if you're going to do this, what's the next step? Because now is this not only just reflective on, all 13 teams remaining, but this is reflective on me. And maybe he didn't say it reflective on me directly in that way, but that was the emotion that was being conveyed. So I do think he was very, very serious. And one thing that someone told me who was in the meeting, he said, look, the Lakers and Clippers were sitting in the back. Of course they were going to be the first ones to walk out of the room, that type of thing. So a lot of this is like logistics and everything else. But at the same time, we know the three faces of the league, or the three faces in this bubble today are LeBron, Giannis, and Kawhi Leonard. And if any one of these three teams leaves this bubble for whatever reason outside of them losing a playoff series, it delegitimizes everything. And if LeBron walks out of this because he doesn't like whatever the mode or, the function is, then it certainly not only delegitimizes the process, but it also severely fractures the player-owner relationship. And that's why he was far more insistent on what the owner's going to do. He didn't have a problem with, necessarily, from my understanding, that the Bucks wanted to do this. He says, okay, what's the next step? And there didn't appear to be a next step, and that's what caused the walkout.
Wow. Vince, great insight, man. I'm learning so much, and I haven't heard it from this angle. Let me ask you this. LeBron and the Lakers, Kawhi and the Clippers, how did they go from being the first teams to walk out and say we're not playing, the only teams to walk out and say they're not playing, to now okay and going back to play? Like, what did they hear? What did they get that ensured them that it was safe to go back and they were fine with it?
Brandon, I think it was just emotions and temper flaring in that moment of this is going to largely fall on us. So when you go back to your hotel room and you're talking to your advisors, your teammates, and you realize not necessarily what's at stake, because I firmly believe that these guys have always known what's at stake. If you look at it, LeBron has far more time behind him than he does in front of him as far as his NBA career. But one thing that these guys take great pride in is, what are we leaving behind for the next generation? And largely, to me, this is critical to saving the economic health of the league and the game itself. Because I still believe that regardless of the player-owner relationship now, when all this is over, I do believe the owners are going to open up the collective bargaining agreement and try to get the money back from the players that they did not get from the gate. 40% of the league's revenue comes from attendance. We don't know when fans will be allowed back into the arenas again. And we know in terms of the court of public opinion that players never get the benefit of the doubt from the public when it comes to black labor, white ownership. We know how that story is going to go. We can talk about the cause and effects and everything else, but that is the simple fact. And whether it's a pandemic, whether it's the vestiges of racism and everything else, we know how that's going to play in the public, regardless of how the public feels about being entertained in the moment. So, yeah, I do think that they took a step back and looked at the big picture. And once they figured out, okay, this is how we move forward in this, we are not reversing course, but we're taking a detour from what this initial plan is. And now we're going to reconvene with the owners. They talked to Michael Jordan yesterday. There was a handful of players, at least 2 players on every remaining team, on a call yesterday around 5 o'clock with every remaining owner, along with Adam Silver, along with Michael Jordan, and they were starting to hammer some of these things about how to move forward.
Why Michael Jordan?
Vince, oh, go ahead, Brandon.
No, go ahead. Sorry, Wilds, go ahead.
Okay. Vince, in previous years, we've seen LeBron
get off of social media because he wants his entire focus on the playoffs, and that's what he needs to perform at the highest level. And that's impossible now. And we also heard Paul George the other day say the bubble has gotten to me, the mental health of it. Can you get a sense of when the ball tips off, what the games are going to look and feel like with so much on the heels of such an emotional and stressful few days?
Kevin, I'm not sure if you had high expectations going into this bubble, but I did not. And the quality of basketball that I've seen, the eye-popping numbers, yeah, we can talk about bad defense and everything else, but the quality of the basketball has been great. And I think this has underscored the level of mental concentration that the players have had to dedicate to all of this in this moment, where you have to dedicate all of this, all of your basketball sense in this 48-minute period to put together, to play high-quality playoff-level basketball. You didn't really have time to really warm up and get your body back into it, but we've seen entertaining basketball to this point. And then once the buzzer goes off, you're back to life. You're back to reality. You're in this restricted environment. You really have no, feeling on how the outside world is being affected by what you're saying, what you're doing, the Black Lives Matter on the shirts and on the shirts and some of the sayings on the back of the jerseys. You don't really have a gauge for how these things are affecting you guys or how the things are affecting the outside.